Well, hey, it's wonderful to meet you. Thank you for taking a minute out, Julie.
Yes.
So let's begin our journey into your life and work by doing this. I want to, 5 years ago, this pandemic began, started raging. It was all unknown. We had to figure our way out. Hopefully, we're better off and stronger now. So ultimately, living through that time period, how much of getting through that affects and reverberates into what you do today?
1,000%. I I like a lot of people kind of talk about my life pre-COVID, post-COVID.
Yeah.
So it was a moment of change for me in a lot of ways. So COVID, March 2020 when it really all kind of stopped. September of 2019, I had a hysterectomy and was on disability, had no job to go back to. And as COVID started, I was when I was like, oh, what am I going to do? What am I going to apply for? Where am I going to work? And then the whole world stopped.
Yeah.
So for me, it was, I didn't have a job to even be on Zoom for. So my whole life was what's happening every day around me. And, I'm just in isolation at home. Now, my husband was here and he has had a job and would go to work. But it was just that moment of the whole everything's changing. So, what is my life going to look like? And then it became, oh, I get to decide what my life is going to look like now, right?
Yeah.
I think a lot of us got a power of not only having time to kind of stop, but we also had power in realizing our life could change at any moment. We get to choose what we want to do from now on. So, that's how COVID changed me in a lot of ways.
Yeah. So
And so I started asking the questions is what I've been doing what I want and what could I possibly do going forward?
So ultimately, let's talk about what you're doing right now in kind of the post-COVID world. If I put you in front of a bunch of grade school kids, sixth graders, career day, the kid in the back of the room is like, "Hey, what do you do for a living?" What's your answer?
My answer is I am a podcaster and I get to interview amazing, cool people all over the world and talk about their pets or talk about their podcast.
Okay.
So that's a, 5-year-old's description of what I do,
Yeah.
but I think it sums it up.
Yeah.
And 5 years ago, I maybe listened to a podcast here or there, but I knew nothing really about that world. So for me, the last 5 years has been a lot of new and uncertainty, but also learning and doing things I'd never done, never even thought I'd do, and meeting amazing people through that process.
Yeah, it is amazing how I've been doing podcast interviews since 2011 and how it just became this thing over the pandemic. Like all of a sudden, it was
Right.
in popular culture, it was in mass media. Like I was like, wow, this thing is turning into a phenomenon. Um,
Yeah.
so what did you want to be when you were in the sixth grade? What was your dream as a kid to grow up and become?
This is great because I actually use this in some of my speaking. I like to say when I was little, I wanted to be one of two things or both, either an accountant or a veterinarian.
Okay. All right. Well,
And both of those make a lot of sense to me throughout my whole life.
yeah. Yeah, that totally does. So let me ask you this. Take me back to your childhood, where you were born and raised. What were these foundational elements that ultimately evolved into you getting into podcasting, being interested, being able to talk to people, doing these things? How did that happen?
That I love that question. So when I was little, I'm shy. I'm an introvert, So I was not that girl that people would say, "Oh, she's gonna get on a stage and speak or, be on a radio," because that's what we had then. But through my own evolution, I grew up in Bakersfield, California, where I currently am and live. I'm third generation on my mom's side, so we've been here a long time. And I had a great childhood. I have had two amazing parents, still have one. My dad passed 7 years ago. I grew up on this little cul-de-sac where everybody knew everyone. We had block parties and kids went from house to house playing and swimming. It was a great childhood. And one of the things that allowed me to be where I am now is that my parents basically made me feel like I could do whatever I wanted.
Yeah.
Both of them. They were always just, they did not go to college. My dad was a salesman his whole life. My mom got her associates when I was in high school. So it wasn't that I saw that and was being that. It was I was new and I got to do anything I wanted to, and I have two masters and a doctorate. So they were great parents and said, do what you want and don't listen to anybody else. And one of the things I love to talk about is thinking about what my dad would think of me doing all of this because didn't know what a podcast was. He barely understood how our phones did what it did. But, but he was a salesman and he was known in our community because he did all the TV and radio ads for our furniture store.
Oh, wow.
So people knew our last name, people knew who he was. He had that personality, and I didn't ever feel connected to him in that because that wasn't me. I wasn't an extrovert. But I've realized through all of this is we all have part of that. And I think my dad would love that I'm doing what I'm doing because it's what he loved to do, which is connecting with people, telling stories, and just, authentically being yourself. And so when I say podcasting changed my life, it did in a lot of ways, but it's also brought me back to places that I feel very connected, like to him now that he's gone, but also just to realize that I can be myself and it doesn't matter what other people think of it.
So, what was the first podcast you got hooked on?
Well, I'm a pop culture girly,
Okay.
so I love anything pop culture, TV, movies. So I'm a big Heather McMahon fan. She's a comic and she has a great podcast. Lady Gang is a podcast I listened to early on. They've been around for a while. So those were ones I liked for fun. And so even though I started getting into podcasting for my business at the time I was doing like career coaching and stuff, it never went anywhere with that because it wasn't exciting. I didn't enjoy it. So that's when I decided to start my pet podcast. I love pets, always love pets. Like I said, I wanted to be a veterinarian. So I decided just do it for fun and see if I even like it. Is this even something I want to do? And so that funness, that passion, that was why I listened to podcasts and how I finally got over the hump to start my own. So that's what I'm all about. Even though, yes, it's my job and I help other people start them, it still goes back to I still have this pet podcast because I'm not making money off of it. It's not doing anything for me personally, except that it's my way to give back. It's my way to help. It's my way to advocate. But it's fun because it's fun to talk to other people about their pets. Trust
Yeah.
me, everybody loves that.
Yep. Absolutely. So, are you familiar with the musician Moby?
Yes.
Okay. He has a podcast. He's a big animal rights guy. I think you might really enjoy listening. It's called Moby Pod.
Oh, I will check that out.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. He's very vocal and he's vegan and he has a lot of guests on there and they talk about, animals and treating them well and just that whole world. So, yeah, it's really good
That's
stuff.
great. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Yeah. So, who's been a hero for you? Who's been kind of a bedrock for you consistently that's allowed you to become who you are?
Well, I talk about my dad a lot,
Yeah.
and only because so my parents had a age gap. My dad was 54 when I was born, so he had a whole big life before I was even in this world. He was a World War II veteran. And so very few of my friends were growing up with them as parents, let alone grandparents or great grandparents. So I had a very different perspective on a lot of things. Like, in the car on trips, we listened to big band music, not 70s rock or whatever, you know? So there were little things like that that helped me to experience much more of the world now, I realize, than other people got to have. And of all the people, even from his generation, he was the one person that always said to me, don't listen to anybody else, do what you want.
Yeah.
And when I was graduating undergrad and all of my friends were getting married, and I had a boyfriend and we could have gotten married, but I always knew I wanted my doctorate in some form. And my dad would be the one to say, don't do what everybody else is doing. You want your doctorate, do it. And he was the proudest at that day when I got my doctorate in the graduation. And I'm very glad that he got to experience that. But I also am very inspired by my mom. She's someone, like I said, didn't go to college, worked her whole life constantly while we were growing up, took classes here or there, took jobs so she could still pick us up from school. She did a lot for us that I didn't at the time realize. And both of my parents have always been inspiring to me because I dealt with illness when I was little. There was a lot of uncertainty for me, and they didn't listen when doctors told them I was making it up and I just wanted attention. They're like, no, we know her. She doesn't want attention. This is not normal. So there's little pieces of both of them that I feel like I have to remind myself to be grateful for where I am and what I have. even when I've struggled and lost jobs and all of that. So those are definitely people I think of because I know that they never stopped, they never stopped. We lost our furniture store. We almost lost our house, but we didn't. I got to grow up in the same house my whole life. So there's little things like that when I kind of woe is me and or I struggle like why am I doing this? Is anyone listening? Does anybody care? I just realize I get to do this. This is something that not everyone can do. Not everyone can just decide one day, I don't want to go back to my old work life. I want to do something totally different. So those are the people I think of. And just, yeah, it's hard not to like get down in this world.
Yeah.
So I have to kick my butt sometimes myself. And definitely, I think I hear my dad's voice, like what he would tell me in this situation. And that helps me a lot too.
So if you could pick one person on the planet that you find inspiring, fascinating, wonderful, and have them as a guest on your podcast, who is it? Let's put it out there.
Well, I would say for my pet one, it would probably be Jane Goodall.
Yeah.
I've always been like kind of in awe of how her whole life is about the
Sure.
animals. I was very lucky. I got to hear her speak once years ago. She was at a community college in my area, and it was just so incredible just to kind of hear her journey.
Yeah.
And I know I can't change my whole life and just dedicate it to animals for many reasons. I have bills to pay at this point and student loans to pay. But I think what I've learned from someone like her is just talking about it and sharing stories is what changes other people's minds,
Yeah.
opinions. I've learned a lot through my pet podcast in the world of animal rescue that education is really what we need. People just don't understand a lot of the ways of the world and how it affects animals. Even like the shelter systems. I thought I was an animal advocate. Then I started interviewing people who do it every day, and I'm like, wow, I only knew a little bit of what the whole reality of it is and how complex an issue it is. So she's definitely an ideal guest because, she's done so much. I would love to talk to her about that experience and also use that to keep me going and maybe inspire some other people because even just volunteering a few hours or reposting on social, there's so many little things we can do to help, whatever that passion is for us, whatever purpose we have of helping someone or helping out in a certain area. So yeah, that would definitely be someone for me.
So let me ask you this. If you were to walk into a room of everybody that's known you in some level of like a professional capacity, and you go through that group of people and go to a podium, and you could tell them one fun thing about you, one fun story, something that would humanize you in a certain way to them, what would you tell that room of people?
Gosh, what a question.
Right?
Well, it's funny. One thing I could say, I don't know if this is the story, but I've had people who have known me in different ways professionally and have interacted with me more now. I had a friend who she was actually in my doctoral program. So she's seen me past life and now. And she said to me, she's like, wow, I know so much more about you now that you're podcasting.
Yeah.
Like you're really showing up. Like she goes, I can tell this is really you.
Yeah.
And she would say, like, this doesn't mean I didn't know you, but you only, I realize I've only showed part of myself. We all have that kind of persona of professional. I worked in higher education. I
Yeah.
didn't, wear crazy clothes or talk about my emotions, whatever. I was a teacher and an administrator. It's very different. And so hearing people like that who have known me, like I can imagine walking in a room with people from all these different places that I worked in things and it would be like, how do I explain to both parts of me that this is all of me? Like I say, the veterinarian and the accountant. The accountant is why I used to teach statistics. I did research and assessment. I like numbers. But the veterinarian in me is the passion, the compassion, the empathy part of me, which is why I have this podcast about pets. So I don't know what that soul story would be, but in my mind, it's that what would I say that both sides are like, oh, yeah, that's Julie. Oh, yeah, that's Julie. Like people see all parts of me.
Yeah, that's a great answer. So let me ask you this. If you had a dream tonight, ran into that younger version of you, say, 18 to 20, and you could give that version of you a piece of advice based on this life you've led, the wisdom you've accumulated, what advice would you give?
Oh, gosh. Stop worrying about pleasing everybody else. Think about what makes you happy. because I was a person who always did what she was supposed to and what I should and, did all the things. But then sometimes I did things I shouldn't have that wasn't the best for me long term, you know? So I would definitely say it to a younger me, relax, don't be in a rush to be an adult. It's not all it's cracked up to
Yeah.
be, but enjoy it. Like, enjoy all of it and really think about, is this what I want? I think sometimes I made decisions based on other people or what was going on in the world. So I would definitely have that little conversation with myself. Like, just take a step back, think about it. Don't make quick decisions, but enjoy everything as you go, even if it's not exactly how you imagined it.
So how many animals did you have?
Currently, we have three cats, two tortoises, a scorpion, and I don't even know how many tarantulas. I stopped counting.
So if you could have a dream pet animal that is
Mm.
not conventional, that might be a little bit like too much to take care of, but you would still love to do it. Like a
Hmm.
giraffe, a hippo, whatever. What animal would you want?
There's so many because we actually had a rescue possum at one point. So
Yeah.
you're talking, like you're speaking my language, but that wasn't me. My husband came home with a baby possum. That's a whole other episode.
Yeah.
Um, One thing that maybe is not so crazy, but I know we couldn't have it right now. We have a very small yard at this point. I love donkeys, and I've always wanted to
Oh.
have a donkey. And I have a couple people I know, someone I had on the podcast who has a donkey named Pedro, and she's always talking about how he's like a big puppy. He's like her most lovable, one of her most lovable animals. I love her videos, and I just think, I would love a donkey. I would love to take care of it. I get to hang out with it. I've always kind of dreamed of having bigger animals. Like I've always loved cows, and I've heard they can be like dogs too, chasing after balls. So that's definitely something I would actually love to have, but is not realistic in any way at this point.
I'm going to send you a link to a book that I wrote years ago called Ebenezer the Donkey. In the community I work in called Grandview, there was a donkey that I used to drive by during my day job as an IT technician. And he, uh, he would bray, people would feed him. I'd take the kids out to see him. We loved him. And he just became a part of the community. And I would write articles when he got sick and then he got better. But he ended up passing. He was like 30 years old, something like that. Anyway, it's like everybody loved him. Everybody knew Ebenezer, so I'll have to send that over to you. So I love the donkey
I
too.
love
It's got a
that.
fond spot in my heart. So it's good. It's good.
Yeah, it's so funny. I follow different sanctuaries that will have, the larger animals, but my friend Joanne, who gotta follow her, she has her own little farm full of all these amazing animals, for the love of Smiley on Instagram. But there's a chicken that had frostbite on one of its feet one winter because they live in Canada.
Yeah.
And now every winter she rides the donkey all winter because his coat is so thick she can sit on it and not have to have her wounded feet on the snowy ground.
Yeah.
And it's just ridiculous, but they're actual animals and this is a real life for her, you
Yeah.
know? So I love that part of connecting with people who love animals.
Yeah. So of everything that you've done and evolved into, what are you the proudest of?
I always say my doctorate, and it's not just because I like to talk about it. It's because there were many things that could have stopped me from actually doing it. I was in one program 6 weeks after I started 9/11 happened, so obviously lots of things changed. And so I stopped and went back and worked and did this. I had two surgeries during my program that I had to pause. So for me, it's a lot more than just the degree. It's everything I did to get there and to finish and to actually have the letters, not getting even hung up on my dissertation, all those things. Because I know that was my whole life accumulation of actually getting there and completing it. So it means a lot to me in a lot of ways. And I say to myself when I'm questioning myself, like, is anybody even listening to this podcast? And I just like kind of kick my butt and say, you have a doctorate. If you can do that, you can do things. Like you could do hard things, right?
Yeah.
So for me, that's the accomplishment, but it's also kind of a reminder of you can do it, even hard things, you've done it before.
Yeah, for sure. So everyone at the end of the day, Julie, has a perception of you. Family, friends, listeners, everyone that's known you as a teacher in professional capacities, but you run the show. What's your perception of you? Who do you think you are?
I think I am someone who is empathetic, but who is open to hearing new perspectives. And that is someone who just wants to share my own and other people's stories to make some tiny bit of good in the world.
Wonderful. So if anyone wants to reach out, they want to listen to your podcast, anything and everything about your world, where do they go?
You can check me out, my website, juliemartypearson.com, my podcast, The Story of My Pet, and Podcast Your Story Now. You can find me in one of many places with either of those.
Excellent.
And
Julie,
please, if you love pets, share my podcast.
Yeah,
Please.
totally. I'm going to shout it from the mountaintops. Julie, thank you so much. Thank you for your story. Thank you for opening up. Best of luck with everything.
Thank you so much for having me. It was great to talk to you.
Yeah, great talking to you.
Hello, friends. Joe Dimino here. I just wanted to let you know that after 30 years or so, I have finally released my first book of poetry through the mighty Spartan Press here in Kansas City, Missouri. As the creator and host of both Neon Jazz Radio and the Famous Interviews with Joe Dimino podcast, along with being a visual artist, I'm ready to embark on a new adventure and want you to be a part of it. You can get a copy online via Barnes & Noble, Amazon, and actually on the streets in Kansas City at the great Prospero's bookstore off 39th Street. You can also visit joedimino.com for links to the book, to more poetry, and everything in my world, including paintings. Thanks for all of the love and support over the years, and please dig the words.